This video is going to be looking at how Manchester City progressed in the Champions League knockout rounds against RB Leipzig and the fashion at which Manchester City did so with the Pep Guardiola tactics that made RB Leipzig look extremely passive at times, and this is one of the best pressing sides in all of Europe. Now, before we get into the tactics behind both teams, check out both my books. There's links in the descriptions below. Check out the Once Video Analyzer. It's the program I'm using to make this video. And finally, check out my new tactics course, all that in the links in the description, so be sure to check that out. Now let's get right into the tactics behind the game. So Manchester City built from the back using 3 central defenders and adding John Stones, their 4th center back, in midfield to give them more cover in transition to protect against this RB Leipzig side that's so good at pressing and offensive transitions. Now Manchester City would then build with a back 3 and 2 holding midfielders, with Nathan Ake playing a little bit wider and a bit higher up the field, creating their asymmetry and favoring the left-hand side. Then Akanji would come as the right-sided central defender, a little bit more narrowed, centered around the half space just outside the width of RB Leipzig's defensive setup. Now what this would do is create this asymmetry going forward, so not only would it impact the 2 holding midfielders, but it would also aid the 2 attacking midfielders in their movement. Ilkay Gundogan would able to drop in the half space, igniting third man options, allowing them to access Rodri when he gets put in the cover shadow of RB Leipzig. Kevin De Bruyne, his movement was different. He was able to operate in blind spots and fan out into the wide areas to progress through the wide areas and find diagonal passes in behind. This was all against Leipzig's 4-4-2 or 4-2-2-2 defensive setup that is usually very intense and very active in their high pressing. They use their cover shadows to try and block the holding midfielders, and then use a mix between spatial and man orientation to use pressing traps to win the ball with numbers going forward. Now Manchester City obviously had a lot of success finding the blind spots and accessing their holding midfielders that forced Leipzig to defend deeper and completely disarmed their press. Now Leipzig, in their midfield third, they would still go with their same 4-4-2 shape with higher wide midfielders, creating this 4-2-2-2 as we said. Now we clearly see the asymmetry in the back 3 of Manchester City, creating an overload on this left hand side with a box in midfield, 2 holding midfielders of John Stones and Rodri with clear diagonal passing options look to split the connections between the holding midfielder and the same side wide midfielder. Now these connections are crucial, first in limiting Leipzig's ability to press, and when these holding midfielders were found, having these progressive passing options into their dangerous players was crucial. Oftentimes Leipzig would then counter this by playing very, very narrow and staying very compact. This would then open up opportunities for De Bruyne to fan out into wide areas and simply progress through wide areas around the block, or access their wingers and have Kevin De Bruyne make inverted runs and underlapping runs to get in behind and disrupt the back 4 of Leipzig. We then see the 2 versus 1 on the left hand side of Manchester's build-up shape, with Jack Grealish in the wide area teaming up with Ilkay Gundogan to target their fullback and create this numerical advantage. Then one key aspect of the team that we can't underestimate is the diagonal connections from their first and second line, the fluidity at which they can change their height, get closer to their progressive passing options, making them virtually press resistant in many different ways. As we move forward, we see Nathan Ake moving into the wide area, creating duel with Jack Grealish and playing with a very tight midfield box that is pushing the last line of defense further forward. Now these 4 midfielders are threatening in behind, they're in the half spaces and threatening the last line of the defense. So this is crucial for how Manchester City play, because they can rely on quick diagonal switches via their central defenders and finding the weak side winger. This can then be followed by underlapping runs from Kevin De Bruyne, accessing the space in behind, in the half space, in behind the opposing team's back line. So this overload and isolate concept worked very well against a 4-4-2, very compact RB Leipzig side. And because of the positioning of the attacking midfielders, targeting the space between central defender and fullback playing in the cover shadow of the holding midfielder made it very hard to defend against when they would make these underlapping runs. Now we'll take a look as they move into the final third, Manchester City, and just before one of their big chances and one of their goals. So now we have our two holding midfielders in a more central role with our three central defenders. We can even see Nathan Ake cheating ever so slightly into the wide area while the other two remain centrally. And if we just look at the compactness of this RB Leipzig side and why it was so effective for Manchester City to overload this left-hand side and play with such high attacking midfielders. We'll highlight the attacking midfielders now in yellow. Kevin De Bruyne, and in this instance it's Jack Grealish pushing the last line of defense with Ilkay Gundogan fanning out into the wide area. So now as we see it, we can highlight the shape from RB Leipzig. RB Leipzig are playing completely centrally in the central three corridors of the field with all their players in a very vertical manner with a very hyper compact horizontal shape. So what I mean by this is the team is hyper compact horizontally, opening up space out wide. So not only does Bernardo Silva have the full width to fade out into, he also has majority of the half spaces because of the pinning and the threat in behind from Kevin De Bruyne. So this makes a 2-versus-1 against the fullback virtually impossible to defend against because of the amount of space that they have to play into. Now because they were able to find their holding midfielder, the defender can't cheat out because it'll open up the space in behind for Kevin De Bruyne to find the pass directly. So his only option is for the ball to go wide. And notice the width of Bernardo Silva. He doesn't use the full width of the field. He stays as narrow as possible, as close to the half space as possible without interfering with the space of Kevin De Bruyne. So when he receives this ball, he'll stretch the defense just enough into this wide position. He'll create a gap in the back line, as we see here. When he goes out to confront, the gap between central defender and fullback will be stretched, and there'll be space in behind for Kevin De Bruyne to use his cutback or flat crosses that he's so dangerous with to then hurt this RB Leipzig side. So those were the tactics behind the match. Let me know if you enjoyed the video in the comments below, and let me know if you think Manchester City will win the Champions League this season.